Imagine a simulation machine that would simulate reality and the life you are currently living, but without negative emotions, thoughts, or experiences. Ever. Instead, you would be living a life of only positive experiences, undergoing one pleasant event after another. When plugged into this machine, you would simulate your own life so accurately that it would be impossible to differentiate the simulation and the reality that you just left. This machine is called the experience machine. Would you plug into the experience machine and enter a life of eternal simulated pleasure? Sadly, or perhaps not so sadly, this machine has yet to make its way into our society. The experience machine is a thought experiment developed by Robert Nozick, a well-known American philosopher. The thought experiment is meant to isolate the question, is pleasure the main goal in life? Nozick, like many other people, could still conclude that they would not plug in and find reason to live outside of eternal net pleasure. My name is Luana the hedgehog, and I would not plug in. And you?
I would.
Really? Why so? I know I wouldn't.
My name is Al the polar bear, and I would plug in. What can I say? I value pleasure highly. Why wouldn't you plug in, Luana?
Well, let me tell you. See, it's not just me who thinks this way. Aside from Robert Nozick himself and his fellow philosophers of his time, many people today can explain reasons as to why they would not plug into the machine. I've done some research on the matter myself and have compiled all of my findings inside. This is the philosophy chamber, where I scrutinize what philosophers have said on the matter. There are 4 main arguments that I deducted from many philosophers' ideals as to why they think others will not plug in. The 4 arguments revolve around number 1, doing, number 2, being, number 3, reality, and number 4, amount of pleasure. Allow me to elaborate. First argument as to why people wouldn't plug in, doing. We want to do certain things, not just have the experience of doing them. We as humans don't want experiences handed to us. We simply do not want the aftermath of the experiences in themselves. What we want is to actually do them, and subsequently have the memory and experience of doing it in our conscience. Things like learning and growing as people are not single instances in our lives. Instead, they are periods of our lives that see change in the long term. The experience machine could only give us the final change, not the hardships of the process. Philosophers reason that because of humans' desire to fully achieve and complete a certain task, the mere experience that the experience machine would provide is not sufficient.
So pretty much we want our accomplishments to be actual accomplishments?
Not quite. The difference between wanting to actually experience things and wanting to have your accomplishments be valid is exactly that. It isn't about accomplishing something and achieving anything, but sincerely undergoing a certain process. Essentially, we want the journey, not the destination.
So we would feel unfulfilled in the experience machine.
Exactly! You're smarter than I expected, Al. Philosophers reckon that we people want to be a certain person, want to achieve certain things, and act in a certain way.
Therefore, plugging into the experience machine is a form of suicide where you lose character and identity.
Indeed, our own genuine personalities matter to us, even if they aren't being shown to others. Who we think we are is just as important to us as who we think others think we are.
Self-achievement and growth are striven for in order to better ourselves and improve our circumstances. Undergoing adversity and defeat is a method that strengthens us as individuals, but could not be offered by the experience machine. Thus, the consequent happiness that self-improvement brings would cease to exist.
Nice way to put it. People have realized that plugging into the experience machine kills the people we are and the people we could be. Quite evidently, a reality in the experience machine would not in fact be a reality. Philosophers theorize, and most would agree, that we would feel guilty and cheated to be plugged into the experience machine. Primarily, we would recognize that all the achievements and pleasure in the simulation wouldn't be real. It's that accomplishment thing that you were talking about. We want our accomplishments to be actual accomplishments, not simulations. Our entire simulated lives would be limited to a man-made reality. We would be neglecting truth, deep understanding, wisdom, and spiritual connections in a simulated life.
Not to mention, many individuals would feel uncomfortable living a simulated life, especially one without suffering, especially while others outside the simulation are still suffering. I mean, people often abandon happiness or pleasure in order to gain wisdom, knowledge, or enlightenment.
Yeah, in summary, it is commonly believed that pursuing a man-made reality or a false reality entirely is a lie and not worth the guilt, ignorance, but pleasure that it may bring. Nothing achieved would truly be achieved, nothing experienced would truly be experienced. Hence, the abandonment of the current reality to chase lies instead of the situations of this reality is a stable enough factor to decline the experience machine. What I'm about to say is crazy, but bear with me. The amount of pleasure that we experience in our lives is less relevant to us than the dynamic of pleasure. Instead of quantity, it's the feeling of an increase of pleasure experienced throughout our lives. Imagine a graph with a steady incline which represented your pleasure levels over the course of your life. Now flip it over to become a steady decline with the same slope, showing the decrease of pleasure levels throughout your lifetime. Which would you prefer to represent your life? Most emotionally stable and logical beings would choose the first graph. Note that there were no units of measurement for pleasure in these graphs. That's because we can't measure each person's pleasure, especially because it's relative.
Well, what she's trying to articulate is that the amounts of pleasure are identical, but the one on an incline seems somehow more desirable because we would rather become happier each day than sadder. Everyone's amount of pleasure is different, but as long as it's gradually increasing, we can be content.
Accordingly, the grandiose amount of pleasure that the machine gives us is irrelevant compared to whether or not it can provide a steady incline. On account that it is used to maximize pleasure, how could it possibly provide the incline that humans tend to prefer over quantity? It couldn't, which is the fourth and last main argument that I'm planning to present in the philosophy chamber as to why people will choose to deny the experience machine time and time again. Let's move on to the science lab. Here I took the scientific approach to the experience machine.
I'll give you credit, Luana. The experience machine is a thought experiment, not a scientific hypothesis. It wouldn't be surprising if your science lab contains nothing but your blasphemy.
Hear me out. Experiencing pleasure is usually a rewarding experience. When the brain processes a rewarding experience, it will release dopamine, which is a monoamine neurotransmitter. A monoamine neurotransmitter is a neurotransmitter or chemical transmitter that causes transmissions from the brain with only one amino acid. Dopamine is the main chemical associated with positive emotions, but it actually affects movement, memory, attention span, and much more. That is to say, dopamine is very important.
So, when considering the experience machine from a scientific point of view, dopamine is the main dude, obviously. Dopamine influences pleasure and addiction the most out of neurotransmitters.
That being said, dopamine isn't simply produced and released whenever a rewarding experience takes place. There are step-by-step processes such as the chemical evolution from the amino acid tyrosine to the neurotransmitter dopamine.
What happens is the chemical structure of tyrosine looks like this, with only one hydroxyl group bound to the side. In the brain, it will be synthesized into L-dopa by gaining another hydroxyl group. L-dopa will then be decarboxylated, meaning that it loses its carboxyl group to become dopamine itself.
Because of this long process, it's no surprise that it isn't just rewarding experiences and other biological stimuli that take part in the distribution of dopamine. Dopamine levels are also supported by diet, sleep schedules, and emotional circumstances. Without these external supporting factors, dopamine levels would decrease inside the experience machine. The only feasible action play would be to simulate more dopamine-inducing scenarios as fast as possible. Otherwise, dopamine-related emotions would fade into a neutral sensation, foregoing the pleasure we were initially considering.
Forcing more dopamine into the body at an ever-increasing rate is technologically unreasonable and also unhealthy. Emotional diversity and varying degrees of emotions are what help you sustain yourself. Having to undergo a constant increase of man-induced dopamine is unhealthy for you, both mentally and physically.
Seems like science says no to the experience machine as well. The very last portion of my research facility is the religious temple, where I contrasted the beliefs of religions with the purposes of the experience machine.
Before you begin, we should note that it's almost impossible to narrow down an entire religion to just a few bullet points, let alone a main message.
And every religious follower is different from the next. Not everyone has the same beliefs or ideals, even if those are the ideals advertised by that religion.
I know that many religions have the main message of loving and serving one another, usually as their God did. These religions follow the theme of unconditional love and service.
That's true. From an analytical perspective, religions that exist in accordance with love and service would not approve of the experience machine. Plugging in would mean losing yourself, others, and the journey of life. We would be neglecting our obligation to society and family and instead turning to a life of sinful pleasure. it wouldn't be possible to truly love, serve, and sacrifice for others in this simulation. The experience machine's functions are governed by selfish pleasure, not love or service.
Other religions are structured by the desire to end suffering. Different religions link suffering with different things like sin, illness, death, among many. A common origin of suffering in religion is earthly cravings and the desire to obtain simple pleasures. By ceasing to crave for shallow pleasures, one can become enlightened or pure. Through accepting the experience machine, you are therefore also accepting a life of suffering, where you exist unenlightened.
Besides, the main idea of religion is to follow the teachings of a divine entity, not to ignore that and charge yourself with a lifetime of simulated pleasure.
So it's a no from religion too, isn't it?
Seems like it. Let's get out of here. Today, on behalf of philosophers, scientists, religious followers, and humans alike, I've presented a safe argument as to why I wouldn't plug in. Would you still plug in, Al?
No. You've brought up good points, but it seems like you've presented a very one-sided argument today, Luana.
Truly, I have. See, the experience machine is a thought experiment also used to combat the idea of hedonism. Hedonism is the thought that pleasure is the ultimate goal in life, and hedonists would always choose the choice that maximizes pleasure. Unless you support hedonism, there isn't an opposition to any of my arguments.
But why is hedonism bad?
Reasons as to why hedonism is wrong differs from person to person, so the experience machine isn't the best counter to hedonism. It's not that hedonism is inherently bad, but that the majority of society are not hedonists. Beauty rituals that cause pain, heartbreak with someone you no longer love, and sacrificing for people around you are day-to-day anti-hedonism acts. Society accepts the moral that pain is necessary for greater happiness.
So, because hedonism has been downgraded by society, there are many reasons not to plug in, and few universal ones for plugging in. Then what's the point of the thought experiment?
It's crucial that individuals sort out their main goals in life and understand that a life driven by selfish pleasure would not benefit you or the people around you in the long term. So it comes down to this. We as people exist in this current reality. We want to do certain things, not just have the experience of doing them. We want to be certain people, to be someone at least. We do not want to be limited to a man-made reality. Amounts of happiness are irrelevant to us. Our dopamine levels rely on the factors that can only be present in the lives we are currently living. Our religions and beliefs stop us from making rash and selfish decisions. For all the reasons above, we would not plug into the experience machine. Unless, of course, you're a hedonist.